Heavy music in the early 21st century was overtaken by a new generation of bands that mixed aggression with emotion. Along with heavy downtuned riffs giving way to catchy melodies and the blending of harsh screams with clean singing, these bands would later fall under labels like metalcore, post-hardcore, emo-core, and even screamo. And while there are several bands that can be credited as major influences for this new musical movement, from At the Gates to Converge, Cave In, Vision of Disorder, and Grade, Florida's Poison the Well was one of the biggest bands from this era, and they've often been cited as both pioneers and major influences to countless other bands. At the turn of the millennium, they offered a fresh take on traditional metalcore by blending heavy and soft, with often emotional lyrics that sounded like this. The mix of melodic, brutal, and emotional, in many ways, helped shape the musical landscape for bands that wanted to push the boundaries and move past the 1990s confines of pop-punk and nu metal. Former Killswitch Engage vocalist Howard Jones even said in an interview that, "I don't think metalcore could have made such an impact without a band like Poison the Well." If you're a fan of any of those bands, this is the source to go back and check out. This is the original and the best. While Poison the Well were by no means the first band to play music that sounded like this, they were definitely one of the most popular and influential. But despite the impact they had with their first few releases, especially their 1999 album The Opposite of December, and despite signing to a major label in 2003, by the end of the decade, the band began to recede from the scene that they helped pioneer. First, by introducing pretty drastic changes in their sound. And then in 2010, Poison the Well went on a long hiatus and haven't released any new material since 2009. So how could such an influential band just kind of fizzle out? Could it be that they just simply aren't as influential as some have given them credit for? Or is there a combination of factors that led to Poison the Well gradually withdrawing from the post-hardcore and metalcore scenes? Hi there, I'm Joe Meyer, and this is Heavy Academia, a place for discussions about heavy music, bands, and genres. And today, I want to talk about 21st century metalcore pioneers Poison the Well, and how and why they slowly receded from the spotlight of the genre of music that they helped inspire, and hopefully address the larger question of why some of the most influential bands in heavy music have had short careers, long hiatuses, or general inconsistencies, even after finding success. And another band that had a major influence on heavy music, but broke up quickly after releasing a groundbreaking album, was At the Gates. For more on them and their story, check out my video by clicking the link in the description. Now, Poison the Well have been recognized as a major player in the rise of metalcore and post-hardcore in the 2000s, with Revolver magazine listing The Opposite of December as one of the 10 most influential metalcore albums of all time. But despite being recognized as pioneers, some of the band members have rejected the idea that they were in any way responsible for the metalcore trend that swept alternative music in the 2000s. Poison the Well guitarist Derek Miller would state in a 2003 interview that, "Some people, when I get interviewed, ask how it feels to have influenced all these bands and to help start this whole deal. I don't think we did. As far as I'm concerned, the whole thing to start this emo metal was Cave In with Beyond Hypothermia." Now, while members of Poison the Well have given credit to Cave In, whose aforementioned album came out about a year before The Opposite of December, Poison the Well were still a major part of the musical shift that occurred in the worlds of metal and hardcore at the turn of the millennium. So what led to their steady decline in popularity and production and eventual hiatus in 2010? To better understand how and why Poison the Well were so impactful in their early years, but then saw a steady decline, we need to start with their origins. And Poison the Well were formed in 1997 in South Florida by original guitarist Ryan Primack and vocalist Ari Lehrer, while Chris Hornbrook would soon take up drumming duties. And as is a common theme with many of the bands I discuss in my videos, the first version of Poison the Well was formed while the members were still in high school. The band's first 2 years experienced multiple lineup changes as well as name changes, including names like Doubting Thomas and An Acre Lost, before finally settling on Poison the Well. And after recruiting a second vocalist, Dwayne Hussain, the band released their first EP in 1998, Distance Only Makes the Heart Grow Fonder. And the band's early approach of having two vocalists and transitioning between harsh screams and clean singing would become a pretty common format for countless metalcore and post-hardcore bands in the following years. With their unorthodox approach to metalcore, Poison the Well hit the hardcore scene in the late 90s with their EP and toured extensively throughout the US with fellow metalcore band 12 Tribes, but they also played shows with bands like death metal band Upheaval and pop punk band Newfound Glory, setting the stage for what would become Poison the Well's unique ability to bridge fans of multiple genres throughout their career. But despite their vigorous touring, the band would experience an almost constant flux of band members, with vocalist Dwayne Hussein leaving in 1998 to be replaced by Alan Landsman, who would then quickly switch to bass, and original singer Ari Lehrer left the band as well. This shifting in the band's lineup, especially in terms of bassists, would become a common feature of the band's history. In fact, each of their subsequent albums would feature a different bassist. But by late 1998, the lineup had settled a bit when Jeff Morera joined and became the band's sole vocalist, while Derek Miller took up rhythm guitar. This lineup featuring Jeff Morera, Derek Miller, and founders Ryan Primack and Chris Hornbrook would be the most consistent incarnation of the band, lasting up through 2003's You Come Before You. With this lineup, and Landsman on bass, Poison the Well released The Opposite of December, a season of separation, in December of 1999 on hardcore label Trustkill Records, a label that would also later be revealed as having had toxic and negative relationships with bands it signed. But The Opposite of December garnered more and more attention through pretty decent album sales and especially through positive reviews. An early review in Exclaim magazine in March of the year 2000 stated that Poison the Well initially sounds like any number of metal bands flying the hardcore flag, but it doesn't take long to find the nuances that Poison the Well inject into their music to give themselves both distance and distinction from the rest of the pack. The Opposite of December is a sufficiently brutal offering of 90s hardcore, with just enough beauty thrown in for contrast. Excellent artwork and lyrics only enhance this release. Now, Poison the Well also had an original style that can be attributed to the band members' different tastes in music and influences, which also helped them morph with bands of multiple genres. While this led to success, it also led to tensions and constant changes. The band's first vocalist, Ari Lehrer, would later reveal that, "When I think back to the diverse group of individuals with varying influences, ideas, and styles, it's a wonder we were able to write music together. I came in there wanting to play super heavy stuff. Ryan Primack shows up playing Rush riffs on the guitar. And, at the time, Hornbrook just wanted to see how fast he could play punk rock beats." And with a group of diverse musicians, Poison the Well toured in support of The Opposite of December with multiple bands from several different genres. Some of their shows in the early 2000s included playing with pop punk and punk bands like the Lawrence Arms, Strung Out, Rufio, and even Jesse from Operation Ivy's ska punk band Common Rider. And when asked about what it was like playing with such a wide variety of different bands, Derek Miller responded with, "Yeah, punk rock bands, emo bands, metal bands, anything. It's kind of weird, since there isn't really a specific audience for us. Well, there's a group of people, a majority of hardcore kids, who like our music." For a group made up of musicians with such a wide array of musical interests and styles, their exposure to different bands and scenes would preview some of the changes and experimentation to come for Poison the Well itself. Now, The Opposite of December continued to grow in popularity, going on to sell 30,000 copies by 2002, and it was quickly recognized as having had a major impact in alternative and heavy music. But the following two albums brought the band to even greater heights. Tear or Tear from the Red, released in 2002, and You Come Before You, released in 2003 on Atlantic Records, the band's first and only major label release, were commercially successful and saw the band continue its rise to the top of the metalcore scene that it began riding in 1998. But while these albums saw an unprecedented level of success for the band, they also brought more hardships and even more changes. While both Tear from the Red and You Come Before You feature some strong continuities with The Opposite of December and their EP Distance Only Makes the Heart Grow Fonder, both albums saw the band making strides towards a more experimental direction. You Come Before You especially saw the band taking their blend of hardcore aggression and emo sensibilities to a new level, with more elements of straight metalcore mixed with post-punk and even indie rock. And since it was the band's major label breakthrough, the unorthodox, almost schizophrenic transitions and raw heaviness of many of the songs surprised audiences expecting something more radio-friendly. But the album was still well received and has been credited as one of the band's best albums. And despite positive reviews from critics, record sales fell short of expectations. And due to the label wanting a more radio-friendly approach, Poison the Well left Atlantic Records in 2006 without producing any new material for them. The The band not only lost their label, they also lost Derek Miller, who left the band since, as he put it, his heart was just no longer in it, presenting the band once again with its now oldest and most common adversary, lineup changes. At the same time, Jeff Morera revealed that after the intense touring in support of You Come Before You, the band actually had broken up for a full week. In fact, the band's career was affected by multiple dramatic episodes that threatened whatever it was that had been keeping the core members together since 1998. In 2001, the band was robbed while on tour in Montreal. However, the band would get robbed once again while on tour in 2009, this time in Detroit. But the second time around, their entire van and trailer, full of gear, were stolen. In addition to the thefts, Jeffrey Morera developed a throat problem after the release of The Opposite of December that would culminate in him developing a collapsed lung while touring in support of Tear From the Red. It was later revealed that he had been touring with pneumonia for at least a month. The band members also had to work other jobs at various times throughout their musical career, including Ryan Primack working at a sushi restaurant around the time of their final album, The Tropic Rot, hinting that there might have been financial hardships for the band members as well. However, there's no evidence that any of this had much to do with the band's relatively long pause between You Come Before You, released in 2003, and their next album, Versions, released in 2007, or their long hiatus 3 years later. In fact, Hornbrook would later reveal that the band left Atlantic after You Come Before You due to creative differences, elaborating that they gave us total freedom in our creativity, and then we wrote Versions, presented our album to them, and they complained about the fact there wasn't a radio song on the album. So we ended up giving them the choice to release the album or release us from the contract. And this reflects the band's almost constant desire to evolve and push the boundaries of the metalcore sound and style they had become most well known for, while also demonstrating that they weren't ready to let anything get in the way of them evolving, whether it be the expectations of fans or labels. When asked about You Come Before You's experimental directions, Hornbrook responded that people in the band's musical tastes were expanding, and we wanted the music we were creating to be a representation of that. We kind of saw that we were going to be the band that never made the same record twice, and we embraced that. However, Versions was even more experimental than You Come Before You, and with Derek Miller having left the band, Ryan Primack became even more bold in his songwriting, incorporating more and more instruments that had been, for the most part, totally alien to metalcore. And while the album reflected the band members' drive to push the boundaries of hardcore and showcase their wide-ranging musical talents and influences, it was met with mixed reviews and had mediocre album sales, despite reaching number 147 on the Billboard 200. Ever ahead of the game, the band seemed to be bent on moving past the confines of metalcore that they helped establish with The Opposite of December. And even around the time of You Come Before You, Derek Miller would say that we get a lot of grief from guys who just want to hear screaming, but you reach a point where you've said everything you can say with a scream. As far as I'm concerned, singing is endless. I can hear someone sing forever. And yet, despite Versions seeming to have lived up to Miller's wish to push the boundaries, he still left the band after losing the passion he'd previously had for playing with them. Poison the Well would follow up Versions with The Tropic Rot in 2009, which kept many of the experimental elements of Versions, but featured more of a return to the metalcore aggression of their earlier releases, something that pleased fans of their older style. Like Versions, The Tropic Rot also featured on the Billboard 200, but it was a bit more well received, with one reviewer arguing that diehard fans won't be disappointed to find the album illuminates their emotional and edgy side, first brought to you by The Opposite of December, yet is still accessible to new listeners. But despite the warm reception, almost 1 year exactly after the release of The Tropic Rot, Poison the Well announced that they were going on hiatus, telling fans that, after 12 years of being a band, countless tours around the world and records being released, we have made the decision to take some time to explore other interests in our lives. We've all reached a point where we feel like we need to take a step back from the band and pursue other things. Chris Hornbrook would confirm that the main reason for the hiatus was just being burned out. Now, Poison the Well would eventually begin playing reunion shows in 2015, and have recently announced that they've been writing songs for a new album. However, we're still left with the question of why they made such an impact at the turn of the millennium with The Opposite of December, only to slowly lose their position of prominence after the release of You Come Before You, and why their career culminated in a long hiatus that has ensured the band wouldn't produce any new material at least up to and through 2024. So why did they call it quits? Was it the traumatic experience of being robbed, having to work day jobs, Morera's vocal problems, or the band members not getting along? Or Is it maybe more about the band members wanting to free themselves from the shackles of metalcore that they helped develop and evolve? Could it be that while the band have so desperately wanted to move on from their original sound, they simply could no longer bear the burden of living up to the long shadow of their most impactful album, The Opposite of December? To me, this is an explanation that seems to make the most sense. In 2015, Chris Hornbrook was asked about the legacy of The Opposite of December, to which he replied, "1999 was so long ago. It's hard for me to relate to it nowadays. Just simply because I don't listen to that type of music anymore. And I feel like we've surpassed that record musicianship and songwriting-wise with our later releases." But I'm more interested in knowing what you all think. Why did Poison the Well have such a hard time building on the success of The Opposite of December? Did it have something to do with a lack of financial success? Or was it more about them trying to push the boundaries of their own style so far that they were unable to live up to the expectations that fans had for them? And why do some of the most influential bands in heavy music have so many struggles after releasing landmark or pioneering albums? Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Heavy Academia.